Okay, let's start over. This is my first time. Everybody knows that, right? Okay, so anyway, so the plants are growing low, or the branches are low growing, and the ground is moist, and it's an easy way, in that case, to propagate azaleas, rhododendrons, hydrangeas, any plant that has a low growing branch. So you take the parent plant like this hydrangea, and it's got some branches that are low hanging. So we're going to clear the mulch, break up the soil a little, and then this is important. You're going to slightly wound the branch where it will contact the ground. And this is a little different than nature doing it on its own, because, and this will speed up the process a little bit, because it'll get the auxins producing roots rather than just keeping the flow going through the cambium. So there's a spot there. And then you pin or weight the branch to the ground, and you wait about 6 months to a year. Roots have formed, and at that point, when there's some good roots formed, you can cut the tie to the mother plant, dig the plant. It was really wet when we did this one, in case you didn't notice that. And then 2 years later, here's the clone of that plant. So easy enough. So now let's do, I'll show a reiteration of what I just said. And we're going to go here.
Do you want to know how to make more of your favorite shrubs? This rhododendron is one of my favorite shrubs, and it's also one of the easiest to propagate by the method we call ground layering. Ground layering is a method that you can use on trees and shrubs that have branches that grow low to the ground. As a matter of fact, some plants, including this rhododendron, have figured out a way to do this naturally without our help. There's branches that have already attached themselves to the ground and grown roots. Today we're going to show how to help Mother Nature along by doing this ground layering ourselves. The first thing we want to do is select a low growing branch, one that's touching the ground or very close to touching the ground. Once you've selected your branch, clear the leaf litter and mulch that's growing right beneath it, and at that point you can rough up the soil a little bit where the branch is going to sit, and then take a tool like a sharp knife and rough up the bottom of the branch so that stimulates root growth and also helps it to make good contact with the soil. Take a landscape pin and pin the branch to the ground so that contact point is touching the soil. Put a little bit of soil over the branch and then put a weight on it, such as a brick, something to keep it in place, because it's going to have to stay there for at least 6 months. So after about 6 months, you want to check to make sure that if there's an adequate root growth, you can cut the branch between where the roots are and the mother plant. If the roots have not fully formed or you want them to grow some more, you can leave it in the ground, leave it where it is for a little while longer until the roots are more firmly established. Dig a soil ball around the roots that includes as much soil around the roots as you can, and then transplant it to its final destination.
All right, let's talk about air layering. Okay, sorry. Air layering is when a part of the woody plant is induced to develop roots by wounding the stem and enclosing it in moist moss. Some candidates include rhododendron, camellia, azalea, holly, magnolia fruit trees, apples, pears, pecans, grapevines, roses, all kinds of woody plants. Actually, bonsai specimens are often started by air layering an interesting branch from an old plant. So it's really pretty cool way to propagate plants. So the first thing you want to do is select a stem the size of a pencil or larger. This particular camellia is called Lady Van Sittart, and it has variegated flowers on most of the branches, but every now and then it'll send up a sport of a plain red flower. And when that happens, select the branch when you know which color flowers it's going to have. So this branch I marked ahead of time, because you're not going to do this when it's blooming so much, but I marked it ahead of time to have the one with the variegated flowers. So you want to select a branch about the size, a stem the size of a pencil or larger, and then you wound the stem with a sharp knife. You make 2 parallel cuts about 2 times the diameter of the branch apart, around the stem and through the bark and the cambium layer. And you connect the 2 parallel cuts with 1 long cut. Remove the ring of bark, leaving the inner woody tissue exposed. So this is an illustration of what you're going to do to the branch. And here's a pictorial illustration of what you're going to do to the branch. Well, one thing you notice that a lot of times there'll be this green cambium layer, and the cambium is it's the track that the moisture or food nutrients, all the messages on the plant go through the cambium layer. So what we want to do is interrupt that, so it doesn't try to heal itself, and instead sends a new message to grow some roots. So that's why you want to scrape off the cambium layer, and that's what it's going to look like. You can put a rooting hormone on it to encourage rooting. I've not done that before, and it's not been necessary, so you can use it if you want to. If you have a plant that's particularly hard to root, you might try that. And then you apply a handful of damp sphagnum moss, and this is not the peat moss that comes in the big block that's powdery. This is closer to the original plant, and it holds moisture very well. Tie the moss in place to keep it in position while you're completing the process. Then wrap clear plastic around the moss several times and secure it with electrician's tape at the top and the bottom. And the seal should be such that any excess moisture excess water can escape, but the moisture will be retained. Wrap the package with a sheet of aluminum foil, dull side out. So here's some. And this takes a little, if you do it this way, it takes a little bit longer than the pictures would indicate. And that's with the electrician's tape and the foil. Another way to do it is a little bit faster, is you take a plastic food storage bag, cut it down one side and across the bottom, and then gather it at the bottom and fasten it to the stem by tying it with a rubber band that's been cut. So that just makes it into an elastic, so make a good tight bond. And then pack the pocket with the damp sphagnum moss and tie off the top with a second split rubber band, and make sure the package is tight. Again, maintain moisture, but not but let any excess water run out. Wrap it with aluminum foil, dull side out. So this is a off the tree example of how to do that. Same process. So you're gonna wait now, check it periodically to determine that the moss is still moist. And after about 8 to 12 weeks, you're gonna peel back the foil and you look for the white roots visible through the plastic wrap. When it's rooted, you cut the newly rooted plant from the parent plant. Carefully remove the plastic without disturbing the roots or removing the ball of moss, and plant it in a container filled with a moist potting mix, or plant in a well-prepared soil bed. So there's a picture of the roots formed, and after you take off the plastic, and you don't want to disturb it any further than that, if it's dried out a little bit, you can soak it in a tub of water for a little while, just to rehydrate. It's been wrapped up for a while, and then plant it. Next one.
Air layering is a way to propagate woody plants by inducing a branch to form roots by wounding the branch and encasing it in moist moss. Some good candidates for air layering are hollies, magnolias, fruit trees, grapevines, figs, roses, and camellias like this one. Select a branch about the size of a pencil or a little larger and make 2 parallel cuts about 1 inch apart that go all the way around the branch and through the bark and the cambium layer. Then connect the two cuts with one longer cut. Peel off the bark and scrape off any remaining greenish cambium layer. This will help prevent callus forming instead of roots. Take a handful of wet sphagnum peat moss that you've squeezed out some of the moisture and wrap it around the wound. Wrap the moss in plastic wrap, securing it at the top and the bottom with either electrician's tape or a rubber band that you've cut. Make sure the package is tight enough so that any excess moisture can drain out, but plenty of moisture stays in to help the roots form. Now wrap the entire package in aluminum foil, dull side out. Check the package periodically to make sure that there's still moisture in it. And after about 8 to 12 weeks, carefully peel back the foil and check to see if roots are visible through the plastic. Once the branch is well rooted, cut it off below the package. Then carefully remove the foil and the plastic wrap without disturbing the roots or removing the sphagnum moss. Now you can plant your new shrub in a container filled with moist potting mix or directly in the garden in a well-prepared bed.
Okay. So you heard that all right?
Yes.
Okay, so are there any questions? Let's see what we got in the chat.
Jim had a question about.
I see.
Yeah.
Frequency of checking moisture and while wrapped with tape. Basically, just by squeezing it, you can tell that it's still moist. If it begins to feel dry, you can probably the best way to inject moisture is with a hypodermic, just to get some water in there rather than having to unwrap the whole thing, and that will help keep it moist.
Thanks.
Okay. All right, now new plants from cuttings. Now this one is
Chris.
Yes.
One other question. Is
Sure.
Spanish moss the same thing as sphagnum moss?
no, sphagnum moss is actually the same thing as it's peat moss. It's just not as
We're trying to get this running.
sphagnum peat moss. I think the package I bought was called orchid moss, and it's just much coarser than the peat moss that comes in the big cube. Spanish moss, I don't know. I don't know how much moisture it will hold. So that's a living thing too. Well, if it's dry, it's not, but I don't know how much moisture it would hold. So I would stick with the sphagnum moss.
Okay, thanks.
New plants from cuttings. There's 3 different kinds that we're really only gonna talk about softwood cuttings, but it also encompasses semi-hardwood. So softwood cuttings are soft, succulent, new growth of woody plants just as it begins to harden off in late spring. So the shoots will snap easily when bent. The youngest leaves have not reached mature size, and for most woody plants, this stage occurs in May, June, or July. Semi-hardwood is the current season's growth after the wood has matured. Wood is firm and all the leaves are full size. This type of cutting normally happens from mid-July to early fall. But it's also that some plants will, like crepe myrtles, will have already achieved that this time of year. Hardwood cuttings are shoots that grow in the summer, and you're going to cut those in the winter or early spring while the plant is still dormant. Okay, so this is, and you want to know which plants do better by which kinds of cuttings. There's definitely some good resources. This is a great resource right here, Plant Propagation by Stem Cuttings. And in this, you'll find a chart which has many plants listed, many woody ornamentals listed here, and it says what kind. This would be, SH would be semi-hardwood, SW is softwood, HW is hardwood, and these are the preferred types of cuttings for these plants. So this is a great, and this link is here, and we can also add that to the chat. The basics of propagation from cuttings. First thing you want to do that's absolutely important is to minimize water loss, because now we've cut the plant off from its source of everything. Nutrients of everything, is especially water. So we want to minimize the loss, and we want to prevent disease, of course, and encourage root formation. Those are the three basics for propagating from cuttings. To minimize the water loss, we want to start with well-hydrated cuttings, so you can water the plant the night before or the day before, and take the cutting in the morning before it gets hot, and process the cutting immediately, or if you can't, put it in a cup of water. And decrease leaf surface by removing most of the leaves, and you'll be kind of shocked at how much you need to remove. So use pre-moistened medium and water well after sticking the cuttings. Enclose the pot and the cuttings in a plastic bag, again, to maintain moisture. Keep out of direct sunlight, because now you've created this chamber that can heat up quickly in the sun, and you'll probably cook your cuttings. Prevent disease by taking cuttings only from healthy plants, and the way to determine that is usually if the plant is growing well in your garden, it's probably fine. Use clean tools and pots, and anything that's you're going to reuse, clean with 10% bleach solution, rinse and let dry. Use fresh soilless potting mix. Keep moist, but not waterlogged. And then encourage root formation. So we're going to select robust shoots and leave enough leaves for photosynthesis. This is not a lot, just enough to keep the motor running. Stimulate root formation by applying a synthetic form of auxin, which is a naturally occurring plant hormone. Keep the cuttings warm, but avoid excessive heat. And so here's old Mark with his short hair, but he's taking a cutting of crepe myrtle, and this is a semi-hardwood cutting. So he's taking off the flower, very important, because the flower uses a lot of energy. So actually, if you can find a cutting that doesn't have a flower on it at all, a terminal cutting, you'll probably be better off than one with a flower. But if you take one with a flower, you can use it, just cut off the flower, and that will take away that source of energy deprivation. So there's all you need. Take off most of the leaves, and there's your cutting. This is a semi-hardwood cutting. This will be a softwood cutting of PG hydrangea. You cut off almost all of the leaves. So that's still too many leaves, and that's what your cutting is going to look like after all that. So you can cut the leaves down even more. So here's some cuttings that are ready to stick. One thing I like to do is, we're going to do this one in a big pot, put several cuttings in the same pot, is poke holes into the medium, and this helps, this keeps the rooting hormone from scraping off as you're planting the cuttings. So you can use a pencil or a skewer or something to make these holes. So you dip the end of the cutting in the rooting hormone and tap off the excess, and then plant them in the soil bed that you've created. Then now this is one way to do it. You've made a tent out of coat hangers, and that keeps the moisture in there in a nice humid environment without actually having the leaves touch the plastic. You don't want it to have the wet on wet. So keep some air in there. Okay, so these are healthy, hydrated softwood cuttings held in cool water right after they've been cut. This is a set of cuttings for ready to go. We've got, this is a limelight hydrangea, we've got an oak leaf hydrangea, Carolina climbing aster, American beautyberry. All of these things we're going to try cuttings. And this is the potting mix here. This is a soilless potting mix. It does not have any fertilizer. It drains well, but it holds adequate moisture. Don't want to use garden soil. There's too many opportunities for pathogens, and if it's clay, it's going to hold too much water. So use a soilless potting mix. This one contains peat moss, pine bark fines, perlite, and vermiculite. So and I think it's 50% pine bark fines. So here you can take your container. I'm going to do it in a little 6-pack this time, and soak it in, put it in a container of water, and then also water it until it's fully hydrated, because a lot of the materials although they hold moisture, they're sometimes hard to moisten because they are also repellent. So if dry peat moss will repel water. So we want to make sure that it gets moist. Once it's wet, it's good to go. All right, I'm going to use a rooting hormone. I'm going to put it in a little cup because when we're done, we're going to discard it. This container holds a pound, which is supposed to be good for doing 35,000 cuttings. That's a lot of cuttings. So you don't want to contaminate it. So just use a little container, and you only need a little tiny bit. You're going to dip the cut end into the hormone. Be sure to wear PPE, gloves, because it is a chemical. You're good to go. So we're going to we punch the holes in, and then we're going to plant all of our dip, tap off the excess, and plant our cuttings in the moist potting mix, and plant them about a third to a half of their total cutting height. So you see I've reduced the number of leaves there. Okay. Now this one I put, rather than making a tent over it, I've just used a Ziploc bag and put it in the Ziploc bag. This is the way we did it when we went to Master Gardener College last summer. We did them in 6-packs. We did them in a plastic bag like that. I put some bamboo skewers on the corners just to keep the bag from touching the cuttings. And again, keep the bag out of direct sun. And again, bad news, I can't tell you how long it's going to take. You just have to look for signs of new growth, and you can check after a few weeks by very gently, I don't want to even use the word tug, just kind of touching it. If there's resistance, it might be forming some roots. Newly rooted cuttings should not be transplanted directly into the landscape. Instead, put them into containers or into a well-prepared bed. Growing them to a larger size before transplanting to a permanent location will increase their chances for survival. So here, this is a link again to that same article that we looked at before. This book, actually, this Manual of Woody Landscape Plants has a tremendous amount of information on propagating all these plants, because he's got information on propagating every plant that's in there, and it's very, very informative, very helpful. If you have that book, and if you really want to get into it, he's written this book with Charles Heuser. This is Michael Durr and Charles Heuser, and this one even includes tissue culture. So this is all the methods of propagating woody plants. So let's go back to our videos now that we can watch them, and I'm going to show you one more video.
The most common way of propagating woody plants is by cuttings.
Can you hear it?
Softwood cuttings like this hydrangea will probably root the fastest. You can tell the softwood cuttings because the youngest leaves have not fully expanded, and the stems are soft and would snap easily if bent. The 3 most important things to remember when propagating plants from cuttings is 1, minimize water loss, 2, prevent disease, and 3, encourage root formation. First, make sure that your plant is well hydrated. You can water it the night before. Take the cuttings in the morning before it gets hot. When you take the cuttings, if you're not going to stick them immediately, place them in a glass of water to hold them until you're ready. The medium we're going to use is moisture retentive. This is a standard potting mix. It does not have any added fertilizer. It has no soil in it. It's made with peat moss, perlite, and a little vermiculite. This will retain moisture but also drain very well. This oak leaf hydrangea, we're going to remove all the big leaves and just leave the smallest ones on top. And we might even take off one of those. And that's going to be enough for the plant to still perform photosynthesis. We want the cutting to be 4 to 6 inches long. We're going to cut it here. And because we're not quite ready to plant them yet, we're going to just hold them in this glass of water. So here's a cutting that has a flower on it. Now you know that a lot of moisture goes into this flower and a lot of energy, so we definitely want to take this flower off. We're going to cut off leaves, cut the remaining leaves down, and hold it in a cup of water. Now before we stick our cuttings, poke holes into our moist potting mix, and the reason we want to do that is when we have dipped ends of our cuttings in the rooting hormone, we don't want it to scrape off in the soil. The second most important thing we need to do is make sure that we prevent disease. So we want to use a sterile potting mix, and we want to make sure the plant that you're using is healthy. So if the plant is growing well in your garden, you should be fine. Also, make sure that your cutting tools are clean, the pots that you're using are clean. That will help cut down any risk of disease. Now we want to talk about encouraging root formation by using a synthetic auxin. This is a naturally occurring plant hormone that encourages root growth. We do want to wear protective gloves because it's a chemical. I've taken this hormone and I put it in a little tiny cup because after we're done, we're going to discard this. We don't want to put it back into the container and contaminate it. We want to take our cuttings one at a time, dip the moist end into the powder, tap off the excess, and then just stick the cutting in the hole you've made. You want to plant the cuttings about a third of their height. Now we're going to take this whole tray and we're going to place it inside its own little propagation chamber, which is just a Ziploc bag. I want to keep the bag from resting against the leaves. So I've got these bamboo skewers, and I'm just going to stick them in the corners, and that should keep a nice open area there. The bag will help maintain the moisture and keep humidity up. We want to keep the moisture constant in there, but not sitting in water. You don't want it soggy. Keep this out of direct sunlight or you'll create a heat chamber and probably cook all your cuttings. And it's going to depend on the variety of plant, the time of year, the temperature, how long it's going to take these plants to root. Once the plants are well rooted, you can replant them in a larger container. We don't recommend that you plant it directly in the landscape. They're just too tender at that point. Hope we enjoy this way to propagate your favorite woody plants.
So are there any questions? Oh,
Chris, this is Charlie.
Charlie.
There's a particular plant I'm trying to do is, I'm going to say it's either Asian or Korean dogwood. It's the one with the really large, I'm going to say a fruit ball on it, and has the blooms all along the stem. Would that fit into the latter category? Or it's just starting to put out some fresh shoots now.
Oh, you mean a Kusa dogwood, Cornus Kusa?
Yes, that's the one, yes.
There we go. The NC State publication on propagating woody plants, and it has the list in it. Dogwood, softwood, and semi-hardwood.
Okay,
I guess it includes all species.
okay. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. You should do that now. Get
I
busy,
think so.
go. No more questions?
No more questions, but I just want to say thank you. That was very informative, and you did a great job.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. That's my first time. I want to do over.
Nah.
Next time. Anyway, the information's there. So thank you. Thanks for attending.
Thanks, Chris.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Jim. See you soon.
Great job.
Thank you, Barbara.